The Spin-off Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by Merrill. Join one of the most iconic names in wealth management, Merrill. You'll be part of a dynamic team of advisors and specialists working hard every day to grow their clients' wealth. And with the support of best-in-class research, advanced digital tools, and the resources of a global institution, it's truly an opportunity you can be bullish about. Learn more at careers.bankofamerica.com. Copyright 2024, Bank of America Corporation.
This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian makes the team collaboration software that powers enterprise businesses around the world, including over 80% of the Fortune 500. With Atlassian's AI-powered software like Jira, Confluence, and Loom, you'll have more time to do the work that matters. In fact, Atlassian customers experience a 25% reduction in project duration per year. Unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by SparkLab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about SparkLab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to Business is Boring. Startups are an exciting and specialist world, and today's guest is one of the best in the business at understanding companies, people, and what it takes to grow. Troy Hammond is a recruiter who specialises in the high-growth space, but recruiter doesn't quite do it justice. You talk to anyone who knows Troy, and he's also the sounding board, support person, mentor, and champion for so many of the people and companies in the startup space. His company, Talent Army, are the leaders in recruitment, and it's a great business. You get months of salary for a successful placement, and if you have a good relationship with a company and with talent, you can do it a bunch of times. But it's not a simple gig. You need to understand people, business, ambition, and every job you place is your reputation on the line. Troy has a great reputation, and he does a heck of a lot for the space. His work with We Fucking Love Startups, my favourite podcast, and also helping start businesses like Sprinkler, whose CEO Kimberly Gilmore we had on recently. He's so impactful in the space. I was lucky enough to work with Troy at Vend and very excited to have him on today. Thank you for joining us, Tanukwe.
Thanks for inviting me. What an intro.
Yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg, mate. Hey, so starting off, how did you come to be in New Zealand and in the world of recruitment?
Yeah, I think anyone that knows anything about recruitment knows that probably no one chooses to go into recruitment. It's one of those things that you just find yourself in. And if you can hear by my accent or not, maybe not so much these days because I've been here 17 years. But
are you from Wellington?
yes, with a slight Melbourne tinge there. But yeah, I met my partner, my ex-wife, in Melbourne, and we travelled the world and lived in the US and London and all these places. And I was working in tech and got really sick of tech and decided to throw my job in. And this recruitment company, I went in to find a job, and they were like, why don't you come and work with us? And I didn't, but it sort of planted the seed because they pitched it to me as if it was pretty much like IT sales, like I was in. Like you get to, sell, farm, do all these things, like work with people. And it sort of really, it hit home for me because I was going through a really bad culture at that time, and I thought, there's a real art to the way this person was selling opportunities at me, and there was a real art at, I've always wanted a job where I had that left brain, right brain, happening. So left creative and then the analytical side, and so there was something about recruitment that sort of drew it to me. But I think it took a rage quit from tech sales to get me into recruitment. And then my ex-wife dragged me here to New Zealand kicking and screaming.
I come from, why do I want to go to a less good Melbourne?
Yeah. And it was like, Wellington's notorious though. It absolutely knows when you're visiting, and so it just puts on one of those can't beat Wellington on a good days, and it's like this is what it's like all the time. And so I came here for 2 days to test it out, and I was like, yeah, this place is great. That's it. Send the container here. And then as soon as we committed to pushing button to send the container, Wellington just went, oh, actually, this is what it's really like, and we're going to rain at you and blow at you sideways. And
There's a nice kind of spirit of the blitz when all that's going on, though, right? Like you get a real sense of camaraderie with your fellow Wellingtonians when it's all hard.
Yeah, it's funny. Like Dan Buchanan, my business partner, he and I work together now for years, and he's never had a windy Wellington day. So he always comes down and fantasizes about Wellington, and I always come to Auckland and go, oh, maybe I should have moved here. And only a couple of weeks ago, Dan was in Wellington, and it was like 120k winds sideways at you, and we were like having to hold things as we were walking down the street in Wellington. And he was like, "Yeah, I get it now." But
It's like the 7th month of winter.
You're
Okay.
yeah. But I love it. It's a village, and I think what I found about New Zealand when I got here is that it's so easy to be connected to people, and I think if you like you talked about it before in your intro, when you work in a services industry, your reputation is always on the line, and if you do it well, you work hard, people hear about it really quickly, and the word of mouth here is just fantastic. And so, yeah, I quickly fell in love with Wellington, after I moved from Wellington City to the Wairarapa and enjoyed the sun, and then I had the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it's so nice there. How does recruitment work? Because it's one of these things that, when you first become a hiring manager or something and you're like, well, we're going to have to budget 3 months of the salary for the recruiter fee. And you go, what the heck? And you think, well, that seems like a pretty good gig. But how does it work as a business, and what makes for a good recruiter?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's always 3 months. Definitely not in startups, that's for sure, right? We can edit that out later and say it's definitely 3 months. No, so essentially how it works is it's like anything you're outsourcing, right? It's a pain to outsource recruitment because it's like painting a house. Anyone thinks they can paint a house, and then the minute you start it, you're like, what the fuck have I done? Why have I got paint all over me? Why am I sanding things?
My neck hurts.
I should have paid someone to do this. And so essentially we would charge, so Simon wanting to, join another podcast, I would headhunt you. Then you don't pay anything as a candidate, of course. You just get to use the service. We then charge the new podcast that you're going to 12 to 15% of your salary in a fee that's paid contingently. So it's only if you take the job and you start work there that we get to we get to send out invoice. And so you do a lot of work for free as a recruiter. Like a lot of work is contingent, and or you can work in a retained setting as well, which is where we'll charge a less of a fee, but we charge 50% of the fee up front, and then et cetera, 50% on, you going to employment. Yeah, and so it's one of these industries, it's hard to explain to an elderly relative, or when you're at a barbecue saying you're a recruiter, you get people that sort of look at you like car salesmen or look at you like this or that. But I think it's, like for me, recruitment is just storytelling. It's all it is. And when I mean storytelling, like the way you mean storytelling, like as in, like not lying, but as in I'm like the ambassador of someone's brand, and I get to tell it, and I get to excite people on this journey that, that they can go on with a potentially new company. And so, yeah, it's fun. I love it.
Great recruiters, I've observed, are like great matchmakers. They understand the energy of both parties and shared values and shared ambition, and they get a feel for if there'll be some magic and if it'll gel, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'll know within 5 minutes of interviewing someone. And I think, it's funny, right? Because a client rang me a couple of weeks ago and he said, he was like, I'm trying to find this in-house lawyer at the moment. And he said, we tried to advertise it. And then this agency recruitment company just sent me this CV and they're perfect for the role. And he's like, and I've never worked with them before. And he was like, how do I tell them that I don't want to pay their invoice? And I was like, well, like a lawyer, you're probably not paying for that one CV that they've sent you. You're paying for the 10,000 hours of recruitment experience that they've spent interviewing 100,000 candidates, so that they know when they see what you're looking for, they know who it is. But it really is it's like EQ and IQ coming together. You have to understand what the culture is. You have to understand that culture is going to grow as well, and that culture is going to change a little bit. And so what's the right horse for the right track in terms of the time? So when we're at Vend, like the early days of Vend to what EverCommerce is now, it's a completely different place, well, not EverCommerce, but Lightspeed, sorry. It's a completely different place. And so, yeah, you definitely have to you have to understand people's like motivational drivers, where their skills are, what their, the stuff that they're not telling you because, interviews are hard.
You're like, are you going to close your funding round? Will you
Yeah.
still exist in 6 months?
Yeah.
Like, it's such a relationship business, right? Because you've got trust not only for the client who, is paying your bill, who's wanting to recruit the role, but if you're putting talent into a company and the company doesn't have prospects past 3 months, I mean, that's terrible and it blows your name up too, right?
Yeah, I always say that I'm probably one of the best VCs in the country just because I've had to pick startups for the last 16 years where I don't want that to happen. And so I have said no to working with companies more than I've said yes to over the years. And that's because I don't want to put someone into a job and then it only lasts 3 months, or I don't want to put someone in, and their funding doesn't come through. And so for me to sign on with a company, I have to do my research on who they are. Do they have the right funding? Or if they don't have the right funding, are they telling the right story? Are they being really honest about where they are? Because they may just need someone for 3 months, and that's okay too. But yeah, it's hard. You have to really like pull the kimono back a little bit, so to speak, right?
And pick the trajectory, in the same way like a VC.
100%. It's. I get calls from VCs all the time, like asking me about companies because you just end up knowing so much about them, and you get the late night founder calls at like 10 o'clock at night. You get so much information, but you just keep your mouth shut because. So I'll go to a barbecue, and I have a remarkable memory. That's my superpower in recruitment. And I'll meet people at a barbecue that I've met 10, 15 years ago, and I'll know who they are, what their salary is, with their career trajectory, like everything about them as I'm walking up to them. But then I'll still introduce myself because I know that they won't remember me. And so, but hey, how are you, Troy? Yeah. And then after 10 minutes, I'll go, I think we've met before.
Yeah. you're like, I'm a walking LinkedIn.
Did you buy that house? Yeah.
And in terms of like, the myths around recruitment as well, like people might have heard of it as like headhunting or, those kind of like zero-sum views of it.
Yeah.
Like what are the myths that you see around recruitment and what's the real story?
Oh, I don't think they're myths. I think that there's absolutely truth to that. And it's funny, that's kind of the reason why you and I work together at Vend, because I was working in recruitment for a long time and I was exposed to those dodgy recruiters for so long. And I was trying to run this big recruitment company, Candle, which was like an Australian-owned company that I was the country manager for here in New Zealand. And I remember I was interviewing like recruiters all day, and I think I met 8 in a row. And I got to the end of the day, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I feel deflated that this is our industry. And what it is they all see it as like it's anyone that. You don't need a degree to be a recruiter. It's a low barrier of entry, and you can make a lot of money if you're very successful at it. And so it does attract the wrong type of people. The influencery people of this generation, are trying to sell your stocks on Instagram or whatever it is. But and so you, like anything, I think you've got to work hard to find a good recruiter, like a good real estate agent, like a good car salesman, like anyone that's trying to sell you a service. When you find someone good, you tell everyone because you've had a great experience.
How did you come to be in at Vend? So you're country managing for Candle before that.
Yeah, so I was country managing at Candle. I decided that this one particular day, I was like, I've had enough. Like, it was heartbreaking to me as a recruiter that I couldn't hire any one of these people. That I think it was like 3 days of interviewing, and I didn't even want to take anyone through to the second level. And I was like, I'd be embarrassed to have any of these in my team. And then I just thought, fuck it, I'm going to leave. I'm just going to vote with my feet and do something about it. And so I went off and like built a startup. So we built like a recruitment platform for like passive candidates to be able to attach themselves to brands. And we had a crazy story of a startup. We could have a whole podcast episode on that startup. But essentially, my co-founder developed a drug problem, married a prostitute, and ran away and got locked up in jail.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of stories about why startups don't go the way, but there are those ones, I imagine.
I literally came into the office one day because I was still moonlighting from my last job as we were building it. And then when I quit my job to come into the office to work on it full time, I came in and a couple of the engineers who are good friends of mine now were like, there was a dodgy guy in here earlier. And so he left his phone number. And I was like, all right. So I got this napkin phone number and rang this guy. And he was like, yeah, you owe me this amount of money. And I was like, what? And then he came in and showed me this contract where this guy had sold 50% of the company that he didn't own to support his drug habit. And it started off like, I remember in the early days, he was like, I'll just do a little bit of drugs because I can stay up all night coding. And I was like, well, not for me, but I'm not going to say anything if that's your flow. And then I just didn't realize that it got so out of control that, it was turned into him going to jail. And I had to call up the investors and tell them, like, because we had, it was a proper company. We had a, $3 million investment, and I had to call these investors, and 3 out of the 4 investors said, "This is crap. Let's just divulge ourselves of this." And one was like, "I'm just going to back him," because we all said we're leaving, and he was going to stay. That person's no longer an investor for what it's worth.
Whoa, that's believing in founders.
So then I found myself without a job, right? And I was like, "Holy crap, what am I going to do?" And so I just tweeted for years. For a long time, I haven't found myself, in a job. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. What should I do next? And Kirsty Grant replied to me and said,
Good old Kirsty Grant.
"Why don't you come and work at Vend?" And I was like, "Oh, no, I couldn't do internal recruitment," because anyone that doesn't know recruitment, like agency recruitment is like, it's like a bit like you, like with the creative brand from a consultant where you just do the really cool stuff. You get to say no to everything that's really boring.
Yeah.
And then you go internally and you're like sitting in meetings and sitting around with, like these budget meetings and things that you just don't want to be doing. And so I was like, no way, I don't want to be a caged bird, let me fly. And she was like, no, you'll find it really different at Vend. And I was like, no, I won't. And startups it wasn't something I'd ever thought about before then. And Kirst was just like, hey, just fly up to Auckland for the day and just hang out. And I walked in and it was like the big neon, just fucking do it, and just everyone was just really lovely. Like I remember just being like, everyone was lovely. And then it just clocked for me. Because I remember thinking, I was talking to Ben Graceword and someone else, I can't remember. And I remember thinking, I'm going to learn way more here in however long I'm here than I would have learned in the last 6 years of my recruitment by sitting in the teams and just like truly understanding it. And so, that's how I ended up at Vend.
It was such a special environment, right? And that kind of, it's all about the people, right? And people like Kirsty and people who are able to talent spot and bring people in. But also, I was reflecting on it recently when talking with Kimberly, who, great mutual friend from Vend. Like, the standards were so high and the excellence culture and the performance culture was so high that, like, if anyone was letting anyone down by not pulling their weight, they were out. They were out in a nice way, but they were out. And, like, it's such an amazing place that it had that ability to be the nicest place I've ever worked, but also these super high standards.
And you kept people honest with those standards. And I think that's what we've lost over the last 5 years in business, is that we now are no longer performance cultures. I think it's swung back. The pendulum's coming back now, and we're coming back to, like, I know a lot of the founders that I'm talking to are performance culture first and foremost. But I think we let our teams get away with so much over the last 5 years that managers didn't know how to lead. They didn't know how to have a strong conversation. We didn't feel like we were all on the bus going forward, moving ahead. It was like 19 different Ubers all going to the same location but in different times and, different wants. And so, I'm really passionate about, like, ensuring people think about startups as a performance culture.
Yeah.
So,
and it's been a tight labour market, right? Like,
Yeah,
it swings back a little bit the other way. Employers are able to kind of be a little bit more stringent on terms. One of the things that like absolutely amazed me about the Vend hypergrowth journey was, you were at the absolute front of this with the recruitment, brought on a couple of hundred people in a year with very few missteps.
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
Yeah, I think, like, we had a really good team, and I think I was listening to your pod with Kirst, and, like, I read that LinkedIn post, and I really resonate with, because I also think that the reason why Kimberly and Dan and I set up Sprinkler in the early days is because HR people aren't all the same either. There's a lot of HR people who don't do it for the right reasons, like recruiters who don't do it for the right reasons. And I think when you're in a people-focused role, it's so important that you get the right person at the right stage for your business. And Ven nailed it. And when I first started, who was it? It was Mel and Brian. Was Brian there when you were there? Yeah, Brian and Kirst and a couple of, like, VP and Jordo. And I just came in and I remember thinking, these people care so much, but they also want to work hard. And it wasn't the lip service people in culture or recruitment. And, we had some tough times because we had so many people, like, so many jobs, and, there was not many PHP developers left in the country we hadn't spoken to at that stage, or whatever other roles were. And so, but yeah, it was super fun. I loved it. I had so much fun, and I think if you are lucky enough, like we were, to have a really good startup as your first startup, you're always chasing that dragon. You're always trying to find that buzz again. And so
I think we were lucky too, as the scene was a lot less mature and there were fewer places for talent to go to.
Yeah.
And so we were lucky to have such a concentration of talent. Like you look at where so many people of that company have gone on to and the impact they've made, and you're like, holy shit, it was like a unicorn factory.
I think I agree. I think Venn was the first one that really unlocked employment branding in startups in New Zealand. Like, traditionally it was very boring, like a recruitment service. And I remember what motivated me. The reason why I started following Vend was that "Wear What You Want" video like the recruitment video, and it was a cheesy, like I imagine. Did you work on that?
No, that was Nick and Vaughan. Like Nick Holdsworth and Vaughan Ferguson. Like they are instinctive brand builders from the get go.
Yeah, and it just like it really motivated me. It was like that they're fun, they don't take themselves seriously. You get to work hard, you get to work on really interesting problems, and that drew something out. And like I'm sure you're probably the same, right? I went to Venn, I took $100,000 pay cut to go there.
I went in half time because I needed to stay freelancing half the time to keep paying for my kids.
I wish I was that smart.
And then eventually went full time. But I took 1/3 pay cut, 2/3 pay cut.
I remember going home to my wife and 2 kids, and like having to I remember working on my pitch in my head to tell my wife why I was going to take this job, because the whole way through there was these other 2 companies and recruitment agencies offering me like $250,000 salaries and this, and I was like, I'm going to take this one that's like 1/3 of that. Or
but the things you get out of being part of something that is growing are so valuable, and then being part of a company that's been successful sets you up for life, and then
everything I've
shared
earned,
ownership as well.
Everything I've earned since then has been because of my time, largely from Vend. It was only a short time. It was like 15 months for me or something, but I learned so much. I learned my love for startups started there, and then but one thing I realized quickly was that I couldn't be a caged bird. I couldn't just do it for one startup anymore, because there were so many people that would apply that would be such amazing people, and I just couldn't put them into Venn because they just didn't fit, and they weren't the right culture fit, or they weren't the right tech, or they weren't this. And so I wanted to find them other jobs, but I couldn't.
So how did you go about setting up Talent Army?
So Talent Army was born the morning of that restructure.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So I remember I walked into, I was the OG first Wellington hire. Like I was there, it was me, and then I got calls, and we got a bit of a Wellington team. And so I would come up to Auckland sporadically, and I just happened to be in Auckland that day. And I remember walking in, and Jordo and VP were like crying at the photocopier, and I was like, oh, I know what this is. This is bad. And I had no idea. Like, even though I worked in the PNC team, like they were really great at like keeping it quiet, and I had no idea. And so I was like, oh shit. And so I remember I walked up to Neil Livingston, who was our chief operating officer at the time, and I was like, oh, we're doing a restructure. And he was like, oh, I'm not like, yeah, I got that. And, yeah. And I remember thinking, because I'd tried to resign a couple of times, like already, and Kirst was trying to get me to move to Auckland and like join the Auckland team, and I was like, oh no, I don't know if I want to move to Auckland. And then I came up. I think I was actually there that day to look at some houses, and I think the day before I looked at a couple of houses in Ponsonby and went, no, not moving to Auckland. But and then the restructure happened, and I just remember the first thing in my head that I thought was, well, how many people are losing their jobs? And they were like 66 or something, and I was like, well, someone needs to help them find jobs. And so I just said, well, I'll just set up a thing and help people find jobs. And that was literally that morning. I just said, give me my MacBook, make me redundant, and then I'll set up Talent Army. And so then I literally did that morning, and I snuck back into the Vend office, and Cos would just sneakily let me in every day. And I'd just be working from the Vend office as Talent Army, just helping people find jobs.
Oh man, I've said it before on here, but like that period and the way that Vend acted in, over and above everything they had to do, like investing and helping people get into new roles, paying redundancy when they didn't have to pay redundancy. Once we could communicate anything, the communication was excellent, although for a little period there while the funding round hadn't actually been closed, it was like pretty hairy. But like all of that was such a, going to business school for how to respond in crisis, and just learnt so much from watching, a core team of people just operate at such a high level through what was kind of traumatic for a lot of people who'd never been they were young, first tech company, everything had been rainbows and unicorns, and then the music stops.
But I think companies benefit from that. And as much as so I'm in Wellington, right? The public sector has been laying off people left, right and centre, corporate startups, everyone's been laying off. And I'm a believer in good things come from horrible places and situations. And I don't think Vend would be the company it is without that restructure. And because I feel like what it does is it re-centers you again to say, because everyone was survivor guilt and smaller company and had to figure out how to do things again as a smaller company. But it gives you a North Star again, and it makes you work harder again, because as you get to a bigger stage of company, it's harder to get shit done. It's harder to build product. It's harder to move fast because politics and meetings and everything comes into place. So I think it was a great thing for Vend, and I think Vend was probably better afterwards, personally.
That it had the culture to draw from to get through that period, and then the way it handled it actually had people feeling better about their environment, rather than most restructures where you're like, well, fuck you and fuck you.
Well, I work with candidates all the time that go through a restructure, and it's not often you speak to people that go, I'm being let go by X company, but they've been a great place to work for. Normally it's like pouring petrol on the fire, like this place is horrible and blah, blah, blah. And
is that a red flag for you when you're dealing with people? Like if people are bad-mouthing the company that they're coming from?
I try, as I become a mature, older recruiter, I try to give people grace now, that I'll let them the first day have that moment, because it is a emotional day or time. But if they do it again and again, like a couple of times, I'm like, well, this is a woe me situation versus, this is says more about you. I don't know. I try not to. I think every time a recruiter goes on a podcast, they always talk about the tricks and hacks and things that they do. And I'm like, they're all fucking bullshit.
Yeah. Or if they get back to me with an email within 30 minutes, you're like, well, I don't know, maybe they're at a funeral. Like, what do you know?
Or they don't take their water glass, offer to take it back after the interview, you don't hire them, and you're like, shut up, you don't know, that's not going to teach you. But what I think does teach you is repetitive meetings with them, and so you can start to slowly work out their culture. And so if I interview someone and they do have a little flag like that, I'll just meet them again before they ever submit their CV. I want to test that, and so if it's a red flag, I'll omit them straight away. But if it's an orange flag, I'll just test it out a little bit more. And so, I think with me, I'm a small company. I work in startups. It's a really emotional time when you're recruiting in startups, because you're dealing with the founders who sometimes are funding it on their own or have just raised money, and everything's about recruitment at that stage. And so it's so emotional, and so it's every time I'm putting a candidate forward, they come with my name and they come with, Talent Army. And so it's, you've got to make sure that you're, doing the hard work to find out if they're the right fit or not.
Well, let's come back in a moment to talk about how you work out if they're the right fit and the work you're doing in the ecosystem. Spark is proud to partner with the Sustainable Business Network and the Climate Action Toolbox. The free Climate Action Toolbox can provide you with simple step-by-step guides to measure and reduce your emissions. Help lead the way to a low-carbon future for New Zealand. Visit sparklab.co.nz/sustainability to find out more.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
17 years ago, Sarah Sheriff sat in a Whistler cafe on a mission to spot just one icebreaker jacket in the crowd. Today, they're everywhere. But for New Zealand brands like Icebreaker, Whitakers and Fix and Fog, going global took more than just great innovation and good luck. The right market can mean success, The wrong one can waste time, money, and momentum. Right now on The Spin-Off, Joel McManus looks at what it takes to get it right and how New Zealand Train Enterprise can help your brand reach the world. Read the full story at thespinoff.co.nz/export.
Hoki mai anō. Welcome back to Business is Boring, where we're with Troy Hammond of Talent Army. So what stage is the business at now? As you've gone through kind of the ups and downs of the whole industry as it kind of like frothed up and pulled back over the last couple of years, right?
I feel like we've gone back to the start. And that's been through me figuring out what I wanted to be as a person, as a business leader, as a leader, as a business owner, entrepreneur. And so as the market went extreme, we were everywhere. If there was a startup hiring, we were usually behind the scenes. And a lot of the times we don't shout it out, because we try and push the brand out of our companies. And so we were everywhere. There was a stage where we were everywhere. And then it got to the point where I was like, I don't know how long I'm going to want to do this recruitment thing for. It's quite emotionally and, mentally taxing. And so I thought maybe I'll get someone in to run the company. I'll just do, recruitment with some clients and grow the business. And so we grew it, but I hired the wrong person, ironically, being a recruiter. The
cobbler's children have no shoes. It's real hard.
Well, you don't spend any time focusing on your own business, right? You're so busy recruiting for everyone that you don't think about what you need for your own business. And so the person I hired ran it more as like a SaaS startup, by just throwing people at the problem and trying to grow it that way. And so we just blew out. We grew really quickly, and I had to make a quick decision. Do I want all those people to then start recruiting for everyone in New Zealand, or did I want to scale back and keep our niche? And I was really invested in keeping our niche and being boutique and not being recruitment for everyone. And I like to think of ourselves as Robin Hood. We steal from the rich and give to the poor with startups. And so that's where I like to play. And so we downsized back to that team now, and it feels so much more fun. And the market there's so many green shoots at the moment. We are in recruitment, in startups recruitment. We are like the canary in the coal mine, and there's money flowing now again. It's not like it was, a couple of years ago, but the signs are really good. And so, and I'm kind of loving it again. I'm loving that next wave of startups that are coming through. And I love being the older dude now in the room with the grey hairs that says, you probably don't have to make 3,000 TikToks just to start up a company. You can do a bit of marketing and do this and this. Here's some things that you should focus on as well. And so, we talk about the 10,000 hours, of learning, and I've got that in 10,000 startups, and so it's fun. I'm really loving it.
When you say the Robin Hood, is that by having some big clients that have lots of roles, you're able to then kind of overserve some of those smaller companies and help them through their growth journey?
So headhunting out of the big companies.
Oh, right.
And stealing their bag of gold and people and taking them on my little chariot.
Getting people back for that 0 to 20 stage.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's about your temperament, right? If you love that 0 to 20 mil or 0 to 10 mil stage of ARR, you're going to want to go back there. You'll not like that slow pace after you've managed to get your mortgage paid down a bit or something.
Well, you say that, but once you've earned a bit of money, it's hard to go back. To eat noodles again, or it's hard to go back when you don't have to just sit in meetings and not work hard again. And so that's the problem we have in New Zealand is we don't have enough people, and so we don't have enough of those people returning back into the early stage startups. And so we are finding those people all over again. We're finding new people for startups, and the brain drain now is exponential. It's
you're wild. Are you seeing a lot of people going off to Australia?
1 in 4 absolutely leaving to go to Australia. And so it's we are quickly turning into a candidate short market. It's going to be here within February, March, by the way I'm looking at it. And so it's interesting times.
Wild. What are you seeing in the world of startups around no code, low code? Because a lot is said about that, and it's probably very useful if you're starting and prototyping things. But by the time you've got real customers paying you, you're going to want to have someone in there who's in charge of all of that stuff and knows what they're doing, right?
And when you hire your first engineer, that's what the hell have you done?
Yeah.
I think it's a really good tool to get you to a position of an MVP, right? But I think that you should you should also be thinking about building, proper product as well. I've seen a lot of startups that pitch me that have no code solution, and I honestly believe that the barrier of entry where it's so easy and so cheap to start a startup now means we've got so many more people doing it, and you've got all these influencers now that are like, I'm working with them behind the scenes, or I've seen them and I've said no to them. And next minute I see they're all over LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram, and they've got this $100 million ARR, potential company in 3 months, and, looking for investors. And I'm like, they have like a spreadsheet behind the scenes with this fancy, marketing site that they've built. And so I kind of love the people that spend the money, because it shows to me that they're going after that problem properly. They're actually doing it properly, and they're investing their time and energy. And so they're the ones that I tend to want to work with more so.
One of the things that I've loved seeing over the last couple of years is your We Fucking Love Startups podcast, which it's so great. Like, the stories that you get from people, and you go so deep on the value that for that like really defined audience of people in the startup world, there's just so much value in each of those chats. What led you to starting that? And what's your goal with the podcast?
Yeah, it's funny because I have a couple of people have been talking to me about podcasts recently, setting up their own podcast, and they've all asked me that question: why did you start it, and what's your goal? And if I could answer those questions honestly, I'll say the reason why I started the podcast was I felt, as the custodian of all these stories of startups, I just felt it was wrong not to get them out there. And a lot of the founders that I was speaking to were too scared to get them out there and push their stories out. And so I was like, well, maybe if they trust me and like me, that I can help them get that story out, because I believe you fall in love with the vision of a company. You see it in your mind so much, you can taste it, that you want to work there. And so that's like the reason why I love working with startups, is because you feel that you have to work there. You just know it's your mission, right? And so I wanted to help get these startup stories out there. And I remember sitting around with Dan once, and we were like, should I do a blog? I've always been pretty, controversial and open on social media. And then I was like, that feels a bit boring. And then I was like, should I do a podcast? And, there's so many podcasts out in the world that I was like, all right, if I'm going to do one, I'm going to do one with only New Zealand stories, only Kiwi founders, and just really help tell their story. And so, yeah, it's been a journey. It's like, as you know, right, it's a full-on job. It's a full-time job almost. Mm-hmm. But I absolutely adore it. And I love what the feeling for me is that, if you're lucky enough to ride the elevator up and have success, send it back down filled with information so that the next person finds it easier to ride. And that's what I'm trying to do with the podcast.
Oh, you're totally nailing it. It's awesome. And I think what you say there about when you have these conversations or these relationships with all these different startups, but it's not actually easy for startups to get their employment brand out there. Like, unless you've interacted with a place, very hard to know what the engineering culture's like, or how quickly they move, or whether they're like a soft communicator or a hard communicator environment. And you as the recruiter sit in the middle of so much of that information that people don't really know how to tell their own story. Like you said that, coppers' children have no shoes. All design agencies and marketing agencies have such a hard time marketing themselves. It's always nonsense. But people from the outside are able to kind of tell that story, and it's such a valuable thing.
Isn't it? It's amazing, because I still sit with startups. Like, if I'm doing a lot of recruitment, I'll go and plug in. I'll just go and sit in their offices and recruit from their offices, because I'm trying to learn the culture of, each team is different. I remember at Vend that it used to be people and culture. We would sit up the very front. Then it would be finance, and then it would be marketing, and then it would be engineering or sales, and then engineering up the back, And so each culture was so different. Like, if you go for that long walk down the Vend corridor, the office, you'd hear different conversations and different animations. And so you have to understand how the larger culture is of the business, but then how the micro culture is of that team, and how that manager interacts, and how this person interacts. And so to do it properly, I try and still sit in the teams and the cultures, and then they'll hear me on a Google Meet or a Zoom explaining their own culture too, and then you see them, they just swing around straight away, and they're like, I've never thought about it like that, but you're right. Or, you picked up something there. And so you have to be really observant, and you have to be really authentic, because as an agency recruiter, if you don't work out, I don't get paid, right? Or we have a replacement guarantee. And so I didn't have to replace many candidates because I spent a lot of time like understanding the company, understanding the culture, and then really working on my story, like of what the story of the company is. And that's the story of, of Vend, or the story of Talent Army. And so I want people to buy into that mission, be able to solve the problems, but then also have some growth opportunity for themselves in there so that they feel like they're growing as well.
Well, it's something, from knowing a lot of the same people that you've chatted to, it's a real talent, that ability that you have to give them the platform, but also give them the opening to kind of tell their story in a way that maybe it wouldn't even be the first thing that they'd have said about themselves, but you get that, the flavour out there.
Being a podcast guest is hard. A host is hard. Like, as you know, right? You get some guests that just like answer your questions with like yes or no, and you're like, oh fuck, talk. And so I think that's one thing, because of what I do as a job. I'm able to like help people bring their stories out because I need to know about it to be able to recruit for them. And so it goes hand in hand with the podcast and with this and with the events and and everything that I do. And so
and we spoke briefly about it, but tell us about some of those other things that you're doing as Sprinkler. Like, we had Kimberly Gilmore on recently, who is the CEO there, and you helped to found that company and get it going. Like, that kind of thing is so valuable. So what was it that you saw that you wanted to help make happen there?
Yeah, so Dan and I with Talent Army, Dan's my business partner, so I set up Talent Army and then brought Dan on a year or two later to run Auckland, and he's now the left arm of my right arm, let's be honest, my stronger arm. And so we work with all these startups, and we're the recruitment team, but we kept getting asked HR questions, and if anyone that knows me knows I shouldn't be an HR person. And so I kept saying, oh, look, I'll find out and come back to you. But what I noticed was that they may even have had an HR person, but they didn't trust them, and that's because, like recruiters and HR, you get a lot of people that go in there wanting to be famous. They want to speak at the events and they were doing all these things. And so they're doing it for the wrong reasons. And I kept saying, early stage found startups, like I was like, you don't necessarily need a full-time person, but you need a people strategy from day one. Like you should be thinking about it. And so we saw something there that was like, almost like the fractional model, that was like, just get someone really good for 4 hours a week, or get something so that you have a strategy, because if you have the strategy, you've got something that you can put in place. And so, so we actually set up the previous company that we set up was called Cultivate, which was essentially the same as Sprinkler. And then Kimberly came about, and we heard Kimberly was looking, and we were like, please come. And then now it's her thing, it's.
And she's just the best in the business.
Oh, there's
much of Kimberly.
But she's the exact person that I'm talking about. Like she doesn't do it for her own brand. She goes in, she does a lot of things behind the scenes. She's like the cheerleader of that company. She's putting things in place. And I think that's the future of HR for me, for startups, is that, you get someone in early and then she can help you with that.
Oh, I'm so hot on this. I think it's absolutely mad that people are the biggest spending line, and your only way that you can go from being small to big is successfully bring people on, give them a good experience and develop them. Yet, people who have never managed people become founders and then just blunder forward, and you're like, you wouldn't do it in any other part of your business. You'd get kind of some specialist structure.
And with startups, we can't afford to hire heavy-hitting managers that have been and done it before. A lot of them are joining with no experience in leadership, and so getting someone that can come in and help them, is so much better. And so, it's I'm a big believer in it. And so we've, like, a lot of the things that I've done are around that industry. Like, I've got, we set up meetups off the back of the podcast where we're trying to get people back in Wellington again together. I do a lot of stuff with Serge Van Dam where we take the piss out of each other online.
Your video series with Serge was genius. But actually, all the posts, you're kind of like, you're an ad agency in and of yourself, with all the ways that you have to find new ways to capture people's attention and riff off things that are currently happening.
Yeah, well, it's not that hard if you see most recruiters' posts on LinkedIn, right? And so they're pretty boring and vanilla and make me want to vomit. Now hiring X, Y, and Z. But I think for me, it's like I do spend a lot of time thinking about the persona of the person that I'm trying to capture in a post. And so all my posts are different, and that's because I'm thinking about who my audience is. And I think to be a good recruiter, you have to be part ad agency, you have to be part researcher, you have to be part salesperson. And so, it's the thing. I think the thing that I'm most proud about in my industry of everything that I've done is that I feel like startups now have a respect for recruitment, and that they've seen how quickly it can unlock things if you find a good recruitment partner. And there's not just talent. I mean, there's others out there that, have great services and great recruiters as well. There's some really good ones. And getting someone in early to help you. Like, I'm probably working with 10 startups at the moment now that I've said, oh no, like, you can't afford me yet. Let's not spend any money, but run things by me if you need to, or, if you need a job description, I'll help you write it, or if you need this. And so we're here for the long haul. If I wanted to be a $500 billion company, I would never have started a recruitment company for startups, and so I'm here to help.
And you just can't turn and burn in an industry like this. You've got to be going, how do we create long-term value? And I think, the typical view of a recruiter is like the typical view of HR. It's just kind of like zero sum, not value adding, past the transaction or something. And I think with both the recruitment you do and the kind of people and culture focus is, it's actually a generator of value, like long-term value.
100%, yeah. So that's exciting. I've got a lot of other exciting things in the pipeline as well at the moment. Chatting to Caffeine, your friends at the moment. I'm not sure if you've heard any peeps about that.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, we're doing some interesting things there. We've got some things that we're spinning. And so most things that I've done have been some sort of, I feel like the startup ecosystem needs this or is missing this, or not necessarily things that I've done that I'm going to be retiring off, but things that I think needed it in the industry. And so there's a few other things that I'm doing. I have this crazy list of things that I do every 10 years.
Yeah, tell me about that, because this is something where, you're a real thinker about what comes next the whole time, in the same way that Vaughan Ferguson was fantastic, founder at Vend as well. And how can I keep challenging myself and actually build the structure in to set myself those challenges to achieve that stuff? Otherwise, time just goes, right?
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally you need to know who you are as a person and how your own brain and how your own motivation levels work. And mine work if I have a goal in front of me. Like if I have I like to have multiple goals, because big audacious goals are so hard and so self-deflating sometimes that I like to set little goals throughout the process. But the list of things that I do came about from a different reason. Like I had a friend who commit suicide, when we were 19, and he, on one of his notes, wrote how he wished he'd done a few more things in life, and he mentioned a few, and I just didn't tell anyone, but I was like, I'm going to do those. And so I did them, and I ended up writing my own little list of, it was 20 things to do before 20, and it ended up being just cathartic. I remember just thinking, well, if I die tomorrow now, there's nothing that I'm wanting in my life, and success is infectious, and it breeds success. And if you just keep doing things and keep getting dopamine hits, and you just feel like there's nothing you can't do. And so I was like, well, I'm going to keep doing this for the rest of my life. So I did 30 before 30. I did 40 before 40. I'm now 50 before 50.
And what kind of stuff are you setting yourself up to do? Because some small and some bigger, right?
Yeah. So one interesting one I'm doing this year is setting up for the next 5 years. So 5 boring companies over the next 5 years. And so every year I'm going to start a new boring company, which is topical given the business is boring.
We'll get them all on here. Yeah.
I just feel like I want to diversify my portfolio a little bit, and I want to do things that I have zero experience in so that I feel that challenge again. And so, I've got some crazy ideas. I've got some good ideas and some moderate ideas, and we'll just keep testing things. And for me to set up 5 boring companies, that probably means I probably need to set up 15 companies to have 5 that are somewhat successful, because I don't want to just set up 5 companies. I'm captain at ADHD. I could do that tomorrow if I really wanted to, but I want to do 5 companies that are earning revenue, 5 new companies. And so, that's one of the big ones. I've got a lot of just crazy self-improvement ones, or I'm 50 now, so I'm starting to think about, the next chapter of my life. And so some financial, some children, But it's hard. Anytime I talk to someone about it, they go, "Can I see your list?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." It's kind of personal.
Write your own list.
Yeah. And so, but it's we talked about this before, right? Even when I go on holiday, I won't let myself leave the holiday until I've booked my next holiday 6 months later, because I need to have that thought in my mind that I'm going to Bali in Indonesia and I'm going to hang out with Simon, in 6 months.
And like you say, if you do put it out there and you do give yourself that goal, you actually are way more likely to reach it, and reaching it creates that momentum that you just keep doing more stuff. And it's actually wild, as you get into your 40s, and then a year goes past and you're like, holy shit, that's another year.
Yeah.
It goes so quickly.
Yeah, I'm 45 now, and I feel like I've got 10 crazy ideas left in me, like 10 really ridiculous crazy ideas. And the crazier and the scarier they are now, the more I'm excited by them. And yeah, I want to do some category changing companies. I've got one crazy idea that I want to do that, like, I don't imagine any Kiwi would have ever thought of, paying for that service before. And I'm like, well, that's fucking exciting.
Yeah. I can't wait to see what you do there. And as a couple of closing thoughts, what would your advice be to someone who's wanting to build a business, as you've got all of these really great viewpoints, right, about the mix of what it takes of people, the right kind of structure, and also the building the brand. You're an excellent brand builder and communicator of what you're doing. What kind of advice do you have for people who do want to build their business?
Yeah, I think the fundamental thing for me is that you've just got to start, right? And so I think a lot of people stop before they start. There's, what's that saying? 90% of people in the world wait for things to happen. 9% of people in the world don't know what's happening, and 1% of people in the world make things happen, right? And I think it was like an old sales manager that told me that, trying to whip me to get more sales. And I was like, yes, sir, I'll be 1%. But that stuck with me for the rest of my life, is that so many people don't start, or they wait for things to happen. And so I think push yourself out there and then start telling people what you're going to do. Just set yourself little goals. And so I've been really open and authentic online about who I am and everything that I do, because I'm like Vegemite, sorry, right? And so you either love me or you hate me, or Marmite, in New Zealand, and that's okay with me, because I'd rather deal with people who get me and understand who my brand is, and we resonate with them or myself personally. And so I just find that being really authentic online, telling you an authentic story, getting it out there, people just come to you, they're attracted to you. And then set yourself little milestones, because if you think you're going to go off and start a business and make $2 million next year, you're dreaming. You're not. It's not going to happen.
It's a long journey. It's a lot of work. And then, as a final thought, right? What will success be for you and for Talent Army?
Yeah, I don't know. As a services company, right, it's hard to define success. I wish I had tracked, from day dot, all the companies that have raised, how much they've raised, and all these things. One thing that really made me stand up and be really proud was a couple of months ago, I realized that I'd put personally 1,000 people myself into startups, in Talent Army, which is huge numbers when you think about what an agency recruiter can do. And so it means that I've given 1,000 people an opportunity at, getting ESOP and growing in their careers and doing these things. And so if I think about what Talent Army is going to do next, or what I would like to see it do next, I would like to see it as my chapter starts to fade on Talent Army, I think to do recruitment really, really well, it's so taxing that I won't be able to do it forever, and that the company will keep going with the next generation of people that are doing it with the same energy, the same ethos, and helping produce all this next wave of startups that I don't even know who they are yet. And so I'm excited by that. I'm also excited by some other ventures that we're doing. We're going to start investing, from Talent Army. We're going to start setting up all these other products and the likes. And so, yeah, there's lots to do, and I'm 45 and I've got limited time, so
make it happen. Yeah. I love it. I can't wait to see what you make happen next. And thank you so much for coming and sharing a bit of the story so far. Absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be on this side of the desk for a change.
It's hard, eh? It's really hard to be a guest. Yeah. when I went on your podcast, that was such a hard experience. It's
because when you're a host, right, you're constantly thinking about, all right, this is where the conversation's going. This is what I'm going to talk about next. I'll ask you next. You can look at your notes if you really get stuck. When someone asks you a question, you're like, all right, I've got nowhere to hide.
Oh, it's so cool. Well, look, we're really looking forward to seeing where you go next, old boy. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much to Troy Hammond of Talent Army. Thank you to you for having us along and listening. And thank you to everyone who helps make this happen, like our producer, Isaiah. If you do like what we do, please do rate and leave a review. It really does help. E nohora.
From the Spin-Off Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz.
Does your brand have something important to say through meaningful messaging that reaches the right audience? At The Spin-Off, we work closely with our partners to create bespoke campaigns that bring value to both your brand and our audience. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, email Beck, that's BEC, at thespinoff.co.nz.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.